Thank you so
Hi.
much for talking with me. I know you just got back from a book tour, right?
Yeah, so I'm a little like "Woo," right
That's
now.
cool. Look,
It's probably like the best time to like have serious questions asked.
well, this should be like pretty casual. I have some things written down. I'm going to ask you. I think we should just jump into it because I like to keep these to like a 40-minute thing, and I know
For
you're
sure.
probably exhausted. So,
Yeah.
um,
Nice to meet you.
likewise, I really appreciate this. Well, okay, well, here we go. And apologies in advance. My Spanish pronunciation is awful, and I know some of your book titles are in Spanish. So if I butcher this, please
It's
forgive me.
fine. No, it's totally fine. I get
Okay.
it.
So you are the Bram Stoker award-winning author of Loteria, Santa Muerte, The Missing, Poems of My Night, Into the Forest, and All the Way Through, Children of Chicago, Crime Scene, The Shoemaker's Magician, and most recently, Forgotten Sisters. So,
Yeah.
needless to say, you're quite an accomplished author. Um, Full
Yeah.
disclosure, I was not super familiar with you when I first reached out.
That's fine.
And I believe the Small Press Apocalypse Party had retweeted something you posted about one of their books, maybe like a Charlene Elsby title.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I love Ben over at Apocalypse
Oh,
Party. I love what everyone does. See, if you read my work, I'm like a baby horror writer. So like I think my horror is like quiet horror. And so when like what they do at Apocalypse Party, I'm like, oh, I could never write that. So I'm just fascinated by what he does. I think it's wonderful work.
I agree. But anyway, so I click. That's cool. I love that you already know Ben and like have a relationship with him. I mean, I love him. He put out my most recent book, but when I saw that on Twitter, I clicked on. Oh yeah.
And
Well,
sense.
look,
Well,
I
he didn't
got
like it.
yours too.
Oh, I love it.
I clicked on your profile and I saw that you'd won some fairly prestigious awards and seemed to be getting a lot of buzz for your book titles. And I'd been living in the world of like underground presses, where like we're more or less like pretentious assholes, predominantly men, who revel in the obscurity of our influences. And I lost track of like a lot of what was going on in contemporary horror that was perhaps more accessible than like a B.R. Yeager novel. So you piqued my interest. Uh,
Oh, I'm
I
listening,
wanted.
but I'm lowering my heater because it's really loud. Okay, I'm
Okay,
listening.
yeah, yeah, no worries.
All right, keep
Um,
going. All right, I'm back. See,
so look, I wanted to know what you're all about, and you were kind enough to respond to one of my DMs and send me and get you gave me the opportunity to read your newest book, Forgotten Sisters. And I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised to dive in and find like a Hans Christian Andersen quote at the beginning of your book to discover this wonderful page turner energy to your writing, this kind of like Hollywood sheen, at least compared to a lot of the stuff I read these days. And while I wouldn't describe Forgotten Sisters as like an uplifting book, that's full of murder and sadness and so on, it does seem like something of like a casual horror fan could get into. And the
yeah.
mashup of like police procedural, fairy tale, and ghost story is a lot of fun, and it seems really ripe for adaptation. So I'm curious, like, were you just blessed with the ability to write this way, or did you seek out certain influences or education to get where you are now?
So it's funny because the Chicago Review of Books called it like my signature style,
Ah,
and it's
okay.
like, oh, I like that someone said that. But I was a journalist before, so I started off in journalism. I don't even think they teach my degree, so I'm gonna be 44 this year, and so
Oh,
my
cool.
degree, my undergrad was in print journalism, and I worked as a, I live in I was born in Puerto Rico, raised in inner city Chicago in the same neighborhood I grew up in. And I was the first person in my family to step foot in a college classroom. And my dad was like, I think you can do journalism. You can figure this out.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I majored in old school print journalism. And I would hang out in the newsroom with these old school guys smoking cigars and drinking whiskey and teaching me how to write X number of words for a space. And I mean, even to this day, I'll get a deadline. It's like 90,000 word novel, go. And as I'm getting to the end, I always get to like 90,000. It's really strange. Um, but I eventually had to stop working in journalism because it doesn't pay very well. And I developed PTSD from a lot of the crimes that I was covering. And so I got a degree in master's in marketing, where my research background comes in. But then I still wanted to write. and I applied to the school, the Art Institute of Chicago, their MFA in writing, and they rejected me. They were like, this is a journalism portfolio. What am I supposed to do with this? And the chair called me up, and this is back in the day where this would never happen. He's like, can you get in a cab and come down here and tell me what a Puerto Rican girl from the hood wants to do in this program, which is like a 2% acceptance rate, I think, at SAIC at the time. And I told him, I was like, well, that's your job. Your job is to teach me how to write. And they're like, okay, so we're going to pair you with Jessie Ball and Ruth Margraf. And I loved Jessie Ball's writing because it's very like whimsical and sweet and sad. And he's like one of my favorite writers. So he was my graduate advisor with Ruth Margraf, who's a playwright. And they were both like, you're a horror author who doesn't know she's a horror author. And I was like, is that a bad thing? And at the time, SAIC, I mean, I was like the only like Latina in the program. I think I was the only person of color in the program at the time. And at the time, it was all like non-genre was like the thing. And so I would tell like the other kids or the other adults I was still older in the program. The other kids, like I went to school with like Colin Winnett and Emil Ferris, so it's lovely to see their careers taking off as well. But I remember telling people I was like writing werewolf stories, and they were like, ugh. So they weren't very nice to me. But
I'm sorry.
where was I going with this? So I took a lot of courses with Jessie Ball. Like I took all his courses in like fairy tale and dreams, and then I took a coursework in like detective fiction, and that's kind of where and they were just like, read all of Borges, read all of Agatha Christie, read all of Poe, a lot of Beckett as well. Beckett was pretty important to me as well. So that's kind of where my style comes in. You throw all those people in a basket, and Shirley Jackson and Angela Carter to shake it up, and that's me, I think.
Well, I mean, that makes a ton of sense reading Forgotten Sisters. I mean, but I'm curious because you said in the class they said to you, you're a horror writer, but you don't know that yet. Did you
Yeah.
come to the MFA program being like, I love horror, or you were just into this style?
Well, I was always a horror fan, but I kept it really secret because there was a lot of, I grew up really Catholic, like really, I almost became a nun. That's how
Okay.
Catholic I was. I was like Catholic. And it was a lot of stigma. And growing up in the 80s during the Satanic Panic with liking horror, my father embraced it. He was like all for it. We would watch all these horror films. My mother called the priest to come have a talk with me about what's wrong with me. And so I kind of hid it for a long, long time. Like even with I've been married to my husband like 21 years. And even while we were dating, he had no clue that I was a huge horror fan. I kind of always kept it quiet because of shame and stigma. And when they told me that, it kind of felt like, wow, it's this release. Like I can accept it and embrace it.
That's cool. That's really cool. Well, okay. I'm gonna switch over really quick. I mean, you talked a little bit about PTSD you got from being a journalist and covering crime, and I was not entirely aware that that was what you were assigned to, at least in part. But in the end of your book, like if you flip to the acknowledgments section, you kind of mention your children and your husband, and you write that you stood with your husband at the Riverwalk. And you were staring at the Chicago River one night many years ago, and you saw the shape of a woman floating beneath the surface. Is that a poetic thing, or is that so you actually saw a body floating there, or?
Okay, so I don't believe in ghosts. I've always been very vocal about this, but I'm fascinated with people that believe in ghosts. And I wrote an essay, and it was nominated for the Bram Stoker Award called I Want to Believe. And it was like my exploration with spirituality. I went through like a whole paranormal investigative phase, and I've gone to all these like fantastical places to try to capture something, to document something. And it was one evening we were at the Chicago Riverwalk, and I took a picture with the old Canon camera. So imagine what year this was. And when you zoomed in, it looked like an image of a woman looking out from the water, and that's the image that's kind of held in my head, and that became the novel. So that was like in 2007. That's how long this story's been in my head.
Interesting. So how long does it take you to write one of these, like this book?
It takes me it takes me 3 months to draft a novel.
Wow.
I shouldn't say that. People will probably get mad.
No,
But
that's great.
it's not like a clean draft. I call it like my zero draft. It's I felt like I hadn't written this book yet because I wasn't in a place I feel like yet with my craft where I could blend all of those genres together. And that's what I do. I blend genres, and I thought it would come out still too jagged, so I waited for some time because I really wanted it to feel seamless. Like you were going into historical, you're going into romance, you're going into crime. You're going. So I run, and I think I finally was able to accomplish that. But when I draft a novel, I just write, and I call that my zero draft. I don't stop. I don't correct. I don't clean up. It's all red on the page, and it's my way of bypassing my consciousness, tapping into my subconscious, and just getting the story on the page. And no one will ever look at that draft. That's just this is all here, and then from there, I do have a plot, a master plot that I create in Excel that's very intricate and detailed, and then from there, I continue revising and creating revisions.
Interesting. I love that. Okay. Hold on a second.
I'm just like
Well,
ball of energy. Chris is like, oh my God, who's this person?
okay, so I wrote down a question about your background in journalism, because I actually, I was trying to be like, what are you about? Look at some of your prior interviews, and you mentioned this, and you've talked about this already, but looking at some of your interviews and your sort of social media presence, it does seem that like research has a lot to do with how you get into this. And even in Forgotten Sisters, there's a lot of emphasis on the main character, one of the main character, Anna's like podcast around true crime and sort of uh her wanting to tell these people's stories. And I'm curious, does this sort of research process go into your writing when it has to do with ghosts and fairy tales as well, or is this more with kind of the police procedural true crime side of your writing? Or I don't know, talk about that a little bit.
So research is very important to me. It comes from the journalism background. I have a master's of science, and I have a PhD. I'm ABD with my PhD. One day I'll finish my dissertation. It's in psychology. The writing's taken over, so that's kind of on the back burner. And so research is very important to me, and things need to be a story needs to be grounded in reality somewhat for me to care about it.
Yeah.
Uh, of course, I will play with the fantastical elements. And as a writer, and like even thinking about this from like a marketing standpoint, I know that my poetry fans might not necessarily like my police procedural. My police procedural fans might not necessarily like my supernatural. I'm never going to make everybody happy. And I think as a writer, human being overall, that's not my job to make everybody happy. It's my job to make myself happy. And so I love the research. I love being able to like ground things somewhere. And I do that throughout. And so I do a lot of research early on and even throughout the writing of the manuscript.
So what did that involve with Forgotten Sisters?
So I a lot of a lot of historical documents. So a lot of old newspaper archives. We have this really fascinating research library in Chicago, the Newberry Library. A lot of documentaries. A lot of if you're a Chicagoan, you know cops and teachers and firefighters. You know people, and so a lot of asking around to who can pinpoint me to someone in law enforcement that can answer these questions and that can tell me where I can get like autopsy photos because I really wanted to capture what I wanted to capture the tragedy of what it looks like of a body submerged an X number of days in a body of water. Like not only the terror of a family losing someone, but how they were lost when they're a drowning victim. Like it's very traumatic. To see what's been done to them. So I wanted to make sure I was capturing that accurately as well. So medical journals came in there to describe that decay process because we're organic material regardless. And so, yeah.
Interesting. Well, there's also, okay, so I mean, this is not like necessarily unique to your writing, but I think I was a little bit interested in some things you've said online versus kind of the themes in your book, because this kind of central character Anna, who I think a lot of the story is about, she is often just talking about her loneliness and her process of, doing, in her case it's a podcast, but I often have trouble separating a lot of writers from some of the characters they have. And maybe that's, maybe this has nothing to do with you. But in my experience, talking to various writers, like this is a very solitary thing we do, right? Like we do it on our own and eventually have to share it with the world. And then you started to say recently, and I think you may have just done this because I can't find your Twitter account anymore, but
I obliterated my social media except for Instagram.
except for Instagram. And you mentioned maybe a month or two ago that there was some like nefarious, not nefarious, but like the attention you were getting from various people was a little overwhelming, and maybe felt like people were entitled to your time or to your attention, or just because they're fans of you or whatever. Is that true? Or I don't know. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, it's been very traumatic, I think. And it's hard because I feel like I hate saying it, but I felt like a lot of the attention that I got and a lot of the opportunities that I got was because I was so online and I lived online for a very long time. And of course, we're not our true selves when we're online. We're like a
Right.
character, in a sense. And but I think I grieved very publicly online last year. My father died, and I was very close to him. And I've always equated it with we meet people. That's why I loved your piece on Luca. We meet people in life that we just connect with, like energetically. There's no rhyme or reason, and it can be a friend, it can be a spouse, it can be whoever. And for me, it was like my father. Like we were just so close. And when he died, I had a mental collapse. And so I'm losing my mind. I'm online. I'm trying to, keep my writing career going. There's a lot of people like gawking at me and, things happening. And I was just like, this is so overwhelming. I don't know how to manage this. And I promised myself that I would, and you become distorted. Like people think that they know who you are, and they create like story. And we all do this, right? We all create like
Yeah.
narratives in our head about people. And, I was really in a bad place mentally to the point where I was like telling my husband, like, I think I have to go somewhere because I'm not okay and I'm really scared. And he was like, just sit here at home. I will take care of you. So last summer I was essentially just like locked in my house trying to like recuperate from all of this attention, which is good. Winning the Bram Stoker Award is great, but
Yeah.
that coupled with losing someone that you love so much, it was just a lot emotionally to handle. And I'm trying to kind of continue promoting my work. I'm losing my mind, and I promised myself I will stay online and to the end of my book tour for Forgotten Sisters. I promised myself that because I felt like the book and the story deserved that. But it's created I don't think people understand like the damage that can be done. Like it's a lot of traumatic psychic and like a lot of it's so like psychically and psychologically damaging after a point in time. And I don't think I received the grace I wish I could have received from people that could have given me a breath, like, hey, her dad just died. Can we lay off of her? No, it was more like, we want a piece of you. And you said this wrong. What did you mean by that? And I was just like, my dad just died. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's up and down. Like, I literally have, graveyard dirt still under my fingernails. And I felt like it was so much and so hurtful that I promised myself I'm done with someone called it the water cooler apps. So I'm done with like Twitter. I'll stay on Instagram and maybe TikTok, but that's it for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting to hear in the context of you being an author. I think, again, you might be one of the more well-known people I've talked to recently, which is really cool. But listening to your experience, and I don't know if you know this about me, we're not like super close, but in my 20s, I was an adult performer, and I had a lot of a real kind of PTSD stuff around a similar thing of people of my identity with that, and sort of people taking that for granted or feeling entitled to my attention in a certain way. that feels like a lifetime ago. But I've not really encountered someone in the world of literature who has that same experience. But I think that can be kind of whatever your public persona is, if you get well known enough or enough people sort of glom onto that, I think that can be really intense. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't know that about you. And so I started
Okay.
reading your book and I was like, oh, and I started piecing things together. And so I felt that. I felt like, there becomes this pain of like distorting who I am and people wanting to not only own, like it's become so strange. It's like they want to own a piece of you, but yet destroy you as well. And I was like, this is very dangerous. And I just got to the point where I was like, it's so dangerous. And I feel like my career is doing so well. I think now is the time to kind of step away from it and just focus. I just want to focus on the writing. That's all I want to do.
Oh, yeah.
And I have, you probably don't know this, but I have two children with disabilities. My two boys are on the autism spectrum, and my youngest is nonverbal. So I have to be in a good place mentally to take care of them. And again, I think the writing is all that matters, and social media is so volatile right now that I just kind of I thought now was the best time to go quiet.
I'm honestly a little bit jealous. That sounds awesome. I hope you have a good time off. I don't know if you're coming back to Twitter, but you're on Instagram and
I'll
like,
be honest. Yeah. Yeah.
does your agent or anyone at your press have any issue with you just kind of taking some time off for social media? I mean, I know you just did a bunch of publicity and this is maybe
Yeah.
part of that, but
Yeah. My agent was like, "What's going on? What happened? Did something happen again?" And I had a stalker recently too. Like I've had stalkers, and I'm like,
oh my.
I told him no. I just need to kind of go quiet, and I'm like multiple deadlines as well. So I need to work on my next novel that comes out in 2025. I have the edits for that. My publisher, I mean, when I signed with my publisher, with Thomas and Mercer, they were like, you don't need to be on any social media platform. We're happiest when you are happiest, and that's when you're writing. And I remember when they told me that, like I started crying because you hear about people with like Penguin Random House and who whatnot that they're told, well, you have to be online and you have to market. And Thomas and
Right.
Mercer, no, get off there. I was like, really? That's nice. So,
Well, that's amazing. Well, hopefully you get some chill time, and yeah, spend some time with your family. You've been working hard. It sounds like so. This is your job, though.
no,
This is not your job.
a day job. Yeah, I
Oh,
work
you
full.
do have a day. Okay, so
Yeah,
never mind. Okay,
yeah.
so
So I work
you're incredibly busy. Then you
yeah.
have because most people I'm talking to who are contemporary authors, right? We like yeah, you get published, and yes, everyone has a day job, but it's also like when you're talking about specific deadlines, like you have a 90,000 words due here and there. Like most of the people I'm talking to aren't in that field. Like, you know what I said at the beginning, it's interesting that you're even in tune with Apocalypse Party and presses like that. Because you're also talking about people on a pretty big level or with a certain recognition.
But
But
I think,
that's yeah. Anyway,
well,
go for it.
but I think those are where really interesting narratives are taking place, and I think a lot of interesting work is still. I came up through the indies. I was an indie writer
Oh,
for
yeah.
like 10, 15 years, and so it's a very interesting space. There's a lot of experimentation that can be done there that can't necessarily be done in bigger presses. That there's certain things that can't be necessarily said or done or executed structurally. But yeah, I mean, I work a day job. I work full time in research by day, and I guess it's two full time jobs because my writing is still very like deadline driven and does take a lot of time.
So when you're writing, okay, so you have two children, both
Yeah,
with special needs, you're married, you
yeah.
are writing books on a deadline, and you have a day job. How do you schedule this out?
My husband does like he cooks, he cleans, he takes care of the kids. Um, I am very vocal that I couldn't do this without him. Like he sacrificed his life in many ways so that I can do this, and I'm very grateful. I mean, we're best friends. We've known each other since we were 14, and in some ways, I feel guilty because I mean, he's put so much on hold to support me here. But it's because of him that I can kind of slink away to my office, and he's like, I got the kids, go. And it's not like I can say, oh, I'm going to write from like 5 to 9 and I need utter silence. Like I can't be precious like that with 2 kids. And we have 3 dogs. So there's always like someone in here making noise, and you
Right.
just write, you figure it out. So
Right. 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 Okay. Interesting. So do you have, I mean, on top of all that, I'm curious, like, because it looks like you're reading still a little bit of indie stuff. I'm assuming that you have to keep up with a little bit of what's going on and like in the world of I don't know, like do you consider your books to be now on like a big publisher? I'm actually not familiar with Thomas and Mercer other than your book, but
yeah, do I consider what
well,
was
is
it?
that like considered like a big press? I mean, it seems like a lot of people are into this right now just by looking on social media, but I could be completely
Yeah, so they're more so it's Amazon Publishing.
got it.
So it's like Thomas and Mercer, they have Lake Union. I forgot their other imprints. Um, so it is a larger press, it's in distributions, it's the traditional publisher. Um, but I still feel like I'm in tune with, I feel like I have to be in tune
Yeah,
with
yeah,
so much because I don't want to like, I think it's important to not only read one
yeah, yeah.
narrow viewpoint. And so, even indicative from the way I write, I feel like since I blend genre, I want to make sure I am well versed in multiple things. So.
So just a few minutes ago, you told me in the world you live in now, or at least in bigger presses, that you're not allowed to experiment in the same way that you might on a smaller press. And it seems like you've run the gamut of all this. I mean, you've written a lot of books,
Yeah.
but you know, I don't know that I could call what I've unfortunately only read this one, but I wouldn't say this is necessarily experimental writing. But you're doing a lot of experimentation with genre. Obviously, it's it's all over the place, and I think that's actually super cool. And but there's a style of writing here that maybe some people on smaller presses would be like, well, that's too mainstream or whatever. But I think it's actually quite a valuable skill to be able to write like you. And I think you must have some ability to hone in on things rather than just be like, I'm going to do whatever I want. But I'm curious, does when you said that you don't have the same room to experiment, is that coming from someone at the press, from your agent, or is that just your own narrative saying that like I'm not allowed to do whatever the fuck I want anymore?
That's the all of the above.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are. I mean, I am. I mean, it gets to a point where. So I'm trying to say this gently.
Yeah.
Uh, and I've written for independent presses for many years, and it's usually like, hey, I'm going to write this thing, and they're like, great, cool, go for it, and you write it, and you can be as structurally experimental as you want, as experimental with the narrative as you want, but with moving to commercial publishing, uh, there is that friction of, well, what am I going to sacrifice in terms of my story, my structure, myself to write something that's more commercial? Because every single big press, each of their individual imprints have a certain style. So let's say, I don't know. Yeah, let me not name names, but let's just say like an individual, like let's just say a big five press, right? Within that, let's say one of their imprints, they're going to have a specific style and vibe and theme that they want to make sure that's carried across. And you can call them rules and where you can push and pull. And I think that's similar to where I'm at now. Like I feel like I am very I am very lucky that I have the editor that I have, because she likes my voice and the way I blend genre, and she's all for letting me be as lyrical as possible, which more traditional, like you wouldn't think of a traditional like a thriller to be really lyrical in terms of
Right.
prose. But they let me go for it, so that's nice. But I can't kill everybody at the end of my book, for example. So there's some kind of like
is that literally like direction that you've been given? You're not allowed to kill everybody at the end of the book?
In Forgotten Sisters, originally everybody died at the end of the book, and I was told you can't do that.
Interesting. That's a very that's funny to hear. Okay, well, whatever. I mean, that's not the worst thing to be told, though, if that's sort of the world you need to live in. You've obviously still crafted something very unique, and I think it looks like a lot of people are connecting with it, and I'm super happy for you. I think that's awesome. It's a great book. So, well, we have 10 minutes left here. What do you want to?
They're gonna say, oh, and I will say, like, about, I was just going to say about horror overall. People that aren't familiar with horror, and I'm assuming people that know you and watch you are familiar with horror. And so we know that there's degrees, right? You have quiet horror to now splatterpunk and extreme, and we're really seeing a moment in the splatterpunk and extreme horror, especially within the independent process. I'm all the way over here.
Right,
I'm more
right.
quiet, so and it's just like my own personal preference. It's where I feel comfortable with. For me, what pulls me more is the feeling of things, the emotionality behind the words, as opposed to like the visual descriptions. And I have aphantasia, so I don't have a visual memory. You can tell me to picture an apple, and I have no idea what. I just see nothing there. And so for me, when I'm writing, I have to feel the thing.
Interesting. Wait, what is, sorry, I'm not familiar with the term of what did you call that? Aphantasia?
Aphantasia, it's a condition where you don't have a visual memory. So if you tell me to close your eyes and picture what your mother looks like, I couldn't see anything.
Interesting. So even okay, that's actually thinking back to some of your prose and just because there is like a poetic quality to the way you write. I think that's super obvious, and the fact that you've written books of poetry makes a lot of sense. And now that you say that out loud, I was kind of because there is a lot of there's passages even when you're describing like the house that these two sisters live in, right? And it is so much of kind of the emotional quality even of the walls or the sound of water or something that they have, and yet maybe some of the visual descriptions are more obscure or something. Do you think that has, I mean, given what you just told me, that makes a lot of sense. I like that though.
Yes. So for me, like when I'm writing something, I have to like pull up pictures. I'm like looking at pictures as I'm writing if I'm going to describe something because I can't imagine what it looks like, but I could feel the thing. And like with poetry, it's so easy for me to write poetry because with poetry, I think of it as a condensed, taking an emotion, condensing it in a few words and just beaming it out to you. And I want people to feel what I'm feeling. And so like I tried to make sure, and I usually don't cross my poetry with my into my novels, but that's happened in this novel and the next one, and so I was told to embrace it, and I'm going for it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, not that you need to listen to my advice, but I think that's a pretty cool direction to go in. Great. Well, look, this book just came out. I think people should go out and pick it up. Oftentimes I'm like, what are people working on next? But I think you can probably take a break. And you already told me you have something coming out next year, so that's pretty cool. Do you want to say anything about it, or are we going to keep quiet for a
Uh,
while?
it's I can say it's an adaptation. No, it's influenced by the Charles Perrault's The Sleeping Beauty of the Wood.
Okay, that's
Deals
a
with another true crime event. So
it is a true crime event. Okay. Do you read a lot of true crime?
I used to
Yeah.
read a lot of true crime. Well, I'm going to be going there again with this next novel. So a lot of true crime, nonfiction documentaries. So I'm like mentally preparing myself to enter that headspace. So which will be a little overwhelming for a while.
Yeah, yeah, I feel it. I don't know. A lot of that stuff bums me out these days, but I can get into it. In the context of your fiction, what did you say you're a baby horror writer? I think that's
I was like, I'm like a baby horror writer. Like you won't like see like really graphic things. I don't know. I don't think I don't write gore. Uh,
yeah.
I don't write really intense like violence. I might have like something that's emotionally overwhelming and describe a scene, but I don't think I assault my readers with like graphic content.
That's fine. Look, I've had a few conversations with people recently who do come from that world, and I feel like I've dabbled in that quite a bit of like really extreme violence. And a lot of people are the trend. I just did a podcast with some friends of mine who were talking about the new transgression of 2024, meaning all of that stuff felt very intense in the 90s, but it's almost like we've hit the wall. And how much further can you push it with just violent material? You know what I mean? I think a lot of people are really looking for something else right now. So I think you might be on the right track.
And I think that okay, so like what's transgressive fiction, right? It's
Right.
fiction where characters are rebelling against the social norms. And I feel like what we're seeing right now a lot of is a lot of violence, a lot of anger, a lot of intense sadness. And so how do we rebel against that? Well, me personally, I'm going to take ownership of feeling good. I'm going to take ownership of hope, of happiness. And in a world where I feel like there's so much doom and gloom, my act of rebellion is to have hope and to hold on to something good.
I
So
love that. I feel like that's maybe a perfect place to end. Yeah. Do you anything else you want to say then?
I just want to say thank you for having me on, and I'm enjoying your book
Oh,
and
thank you.
so I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. So this will probably be out in the next couple of weeks. I'll put together a couple of reels to share with you. And I'm just going to reach out to get like an author photo and so forth. But thank you so much, Cynthia. I hope you get some rest after your book tour and yeah, get off social media. This stuff sucks.
Social media and sleep, tons and tons of sleep. So
All right. Well, take care. Thank you for joining me.